Forgiveness is an emotional change that occurs within the person who's been wronged. And that's a key component,
Mm.
I think, for people to understand, because we are talking about at an emotional level. Right? So, in the moment when something happens, obviously your emotions can be high because you feel hurt, and those kinds of things. And we tend to, at that moment in time, maybe react out of the heightened emotions that we have at that particular point in time.
Hmm.
But then at some point, as you work your way through that, you come down to a level, and that's it, you're still not upset, but your more logical, more rational thoughts come in.
Hmm.
And then, so then this is where we start to talk about starting in some ways that forgiveness process. So the first part of it, and I was laughing as I was reading some of my notes, uh, because you get to that rational piece. So then does it become, because the emotional piece is when you're like, I'm going to go out and break all the windows out of their car because they really pissed me off. That's that emotional piece of it, right? And that's where you are. But then when you get to that rational stage, that's when you really have to make conscious choices that are better for yourself, right? You've
Hmm.
gotten the emotion toned down a little bit. So now how rationally do I deal with this? Because then that's when you start either to do those calculated, premeditative things to keep pushing your agenda, or you actually
Hmm.
step back and start to put yourself in a situation where you want to try to move forward for yourself from an understanding and forgiveness standpoint. Uh,
Yes.
and I think that's a huge key. And I think a lot of us overlook that step. It's like, well, now since they did that, I'm going to take all the money out of the bank account, or I'm going to. Those, it's very cold, very calculated, because now you're at that logical
Mhm.
reasoning stage of it, but you're still using that emotion of
Hmm.
anger that's behind it.
I
And
think, Brian, getting to, sorry,
yeah,
um, that logical stage, the power in that is that's where you get to make the choice.
hmm,
And you've moved away from the emotion of it. And now you're thinking, like, okay, what am I going to do? And as you use the word calculated, because the first thing that I put on here on my notes is, if the decision that you're going to make, if you're thinking logically and not out of your emotions, is what is it that I want out of this? Do you want to remain mad and angry? Or do you want to think about what is this going to look like long term? Because you can't change what happened. And so
hmm,
logically, the power is I get to choose.
right,
And one of the things that I always say about forgiveness is it is not an emotion. It is absolutely a choice. And once a person makes the choice that I'm going to forgive, then the process moves along into the next steps of what is it that I'm going to do.
correct,
So that moving from emotion to logic is so important. But when you get to that place, what are your calculated decisions going to be? They
right,
have to be in the right direction.
right.
Otherwise, your emotions may not be in the play, but logically, you're still thinking like your emotions are feeling.
Yeah,
And we're
100.
talking to, excuse me, Brian, we're talking to the audience now. So I want to say realistically,
Uh-huh.
that is a growth process as well. You have to grow
Definitely.
to be there.
Hmm.
There's no way that we could expect, everyone or even myself at that time to start, thinking about, okay, so where do I want to be in this place? Because of course, when someone hurts you, and it depends on what happened, the situation, or
Mhm.
how intense it was, you don't go straight into those conversations with yourself or
Hmm.
anybody else. So
Hmm.
it's really, and we have used this on so many of our podcasts, being self-aware
Mhm.
and knowing your temperature and when you've hit that point where, okay, let me back and think about this. So it takes some self-awareness. Realistically, you have to grow to that point.
Yep.
Couldn't agree more. That's so true. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely is true. And that goes to what we were just talking about with the steps. So that's the first phase of it. That's the discovery piece. That's the self-awareness piece. That's
Mhm.
starting to understand and just reconcile within you your own emotions. Are you hurt? Are you upset? Are you angry? Yes, yes, and yes. And accepting those things, not denying it, or trying to bury it or cover it up, because
Mhm.
that's not going to help you work your way through the process. You've got to essentially own it for yourself. And again, as Tressena said a few minutes ago, we can't control what the other person has done or does in the first place. We really don't have any control over that. What we do control is how we respond to it as best we can, right? So that's the discovery piece of it. And then, as we said, the next step in that is logically making that decision of, what do you do as you move forward. So in that decision phase, and that's what Tressena was also alluding to, is that's that moment of, now what do I do? Do I start to make these calculated moves, or do I actually take a few breaths, take a few steps back, try to get away from it to a degree, and get a perspective on what is my way forward, what is the best thing to do
Mhm.
for myself, because it's done. You can't change what's happened,
Mhm.
right?
That's right.
There's not a time machine or a do-over button that you can push to move back in that direction. So really, we do have to try to figure out what is going to be the best way forward from that point, and that's that decision phase.